I would like to, I was asked to share a Dvar Torah for the participants, and I would like to begin with a story I just heard last week. There is a man living in Israel called by the name of Michael Alush. He's an engineer in the Israeli Tasiya Avirit, aerodynamic industries, which is the industry that produces the Kippat HaBarzel, all the advanced technologies that the world is being wowed by. He was traveling to France early in the morning. When he got on the plane, it was too early to daven. So as soon as he sat down on his seat, he took out his talis and tefillin and he wrapped himself with tefillin. Right after, a flight attendant came over to him and offered him to move up to the business section of the plane, an upgrade. So he walked with his talis and tefillin to the business class, and he finds himself sitting beside a very famous Israeli author by the name of Aleph Bet Yoshua. Anybody here heard of this name? No. Aleph Bet Yoshua just passed away last week. He was a Hasidic child, and when he grew up, he left Jewish tradition, and he's quite accomplished, very famous, on the first line of authors in Israel. As he sat down, the author, this man, turned to him and said, "Here in the plane, I understand in synagogue you wrapped yourself with talis and tefillin, but why on the plane?" And Michael, this Chabad Chassid, turned to him and said, "Why not? God is found on the plane as much as he's found in the synagogue." After they finished davening, they started a conversation. And he told Aleph Bet Yoshua, he told the author that he translates the Rabbi Adin Steinmetz's books into French. And his cousin, Jean-Luc Alush, translates Aleph Bet Yoshua's books into French. So they had a connection. And this Chassid offered the author to study a few paragraphs from Rabbi Adin Steinmetz's book. They opened up a book that he had in his possession by the name of Neshama. It's one of Rabbi Steinmetz's books. And in it, they opened up to a certain page and they started reading that Rabbi Steinmetz explains that being an atheist is even better than people who don't care. Because apathy, if you don't care, there is no chance you ever going to find the truth or connection. But if you are emotionally involved, you're angry at God, you deny God because you can't see God in your life, you care. So you have upgraded yourself to a level where there is a chance you're going to connect with God. Aleph Bet Yoshua was a known atheist, and he actually refused to put on tefillin. He told the man, the Chassid, that he's an atheist. So when they read it, Aleph Bet Yoshua was smiling. After the plane landed, they both each went their own way. And then a few days later, Michael Alush, this Chassid, was invited to give a lecture in Toulouse, in the in industry University of Engineering. And being that he was a top engineer in Israel for the unmanned drones, he was asked to come and speak. However, the organizers asked that Michael, this man, show up without religious symbols, without any special symbols, and they referred to the yarmulke. And he refused. He then sent, this Michael Alush sent his cousin an email saying, "Look what they ask of me, and I refused, and I will not attend unless I have to I can wear a yarmulke." His cousin returned an email to him and said, "I just am with my friend Aleph Bet Yoshua, the atheist, and I shared with him the email from you, and he asked me, tell your friend to never accept that, not to agree, and make sure that he attends only with a yarmulke, because we are Jewish, we shouldn't be ashamed. And of course, he did not give in, and the university later changed their mind, and they apologized for the request. I share that with you because I want to talk a little bit about last week's portion and find a similar idea in this week's Torah portion, which I think is fascinating. Last week, yesterday, we read in the Torah the portion of Be'alotcha. A lot of stories, menorah, the quail, people who get angry at God, 70 elders, 2 people prophesize, Miriam is speaking gossip. There's all kinds of stories. Somebody asked me last week if there is any common denominator that can, so to say, go through all the stories. And I believe that I found something, and discussing with a friend, this is actually some of the Rebbe's points. And that is, in last week's portion, there are 3 leaders of the Jewish people. Each one has a story that appears in the portion. The first is Aaron, then is Moshe, and finally Miriam. And somehow, looking into the story and trying to dig a little below the surface, we discover that they all have the same common point. And I'm going to share it very briefly because there's so much to be said. The beginning of the portion starts with the menorah, that God is asking Moshe to build the menorah and that Aaron is going to light the menorah. Why suddenly we read about the menorah in this week? It already appeared twice before, and there is almost nothing new in this week's portion about the menorah. And Rashi, the Talmud, the Medrash tell us that Aaron is the only one who was not invited to dedicate the altar at the temple. Last week we concluded, the week before in Nassau, concluded the Torah with the 12 leaders, each dedicating a different day the altar. The only exception was Levi tribe. Aaron was not invited. Aaron, as the Torah calls it, chalsha da'ato. He got to be very upset. He was unhappy about the fact that he was not included. And God turned back to Aaron and says, don't worry, you are going to dedicate the menorah. The menorah is something that will last forever, not just one day. This is the Medrash, and Rashi brings it down. The Rebbe is asking, how come Aaron was upset? After all, Aaron was the only one chosen by God to serve in the Holy of Holies. After all, he was the only one who can bring Ktoret, which is a very special service that can be done only by Aaron. After all, Aaron, God himself says that he was chosen to represent the Jewish people. Dedicating the temple was done only one day, one time by each, yet Aaron was serving God every single day in the temple in ways that no other Jew can. Says the Rebbe that we see from here that when a group of people are performing a mitzvah, they do something positive, and someone is not included, it bothers him. So although Aaron has a long list of good achievements and have performed in ways that nobody else did, when he saw the other leaders are all invited to dedicate the temple and he's not, chol shodaitoi, he gets very, very upset or is angry. How come he's not included, and it bothers him? It shows us that we need to care and look around to participate in every possible way. Same idea appears later on in the Torah, in the middle of the portion, about Moshe. We read about Moshe when the Jewish people are demanding meat. They say manna, 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 all day manna, manna in the morning, manna in the evening. We want meat. The truth is they had plenty of meat, as the Torah tells us that when they left Egypt, umikne kaved meod, very heavily loaded with herds of sheep and goats. They had plenty of meat. Also, we find that two tribes refused to enter the Holy Land because they had too much and too many animals. But they wanted free meat. They wanted it for free. And yet we read in the portion of Be'alotcha that Moshe's response to and complaining to God is unheard of before or after. He turned to God and he so to say throws the keys and he refuses to continue. He turned to God, Lama areota leavdecha. Why have you handling me so unfairly? Areota means you've done evil or bad to me. And he continues to say to God, did I conceive these people that I have to nurse them and carry them like a mom or like a nurse that carries a baby? Please do not be evil to me. These are the words that Moshe said. And he turns to God and he concludes his dramatic speech by saying, kill me. If you continue doing so, kill me. And I don't want to be part of this commotion and involvement. Again, the Rebbe is asking, how come Moshe Rabbeinu suddenly gets so flustered and he loses his mind, so to say, in quotation, about meat? The Jewish people, after all, have had worse demands, and they will come up with worse demands, and yet meat, God can only make one phone call to Walmart and delivers many, many trucks loaded with meat without a problem. All they asked for meat, albeit it wasn't legitimate, it wasn't correct, but there is no need for Moshe to lose his mind and get so upset. What happened to Moshe that suddenly he forgets about the leadership and he speaks to God in such a harsh way? The Midrash responds to this question, and the Midrash tells us that God showed Moshe the outcome of serving meat to the people. Moshe, as a prophet, knew that those people demanding the meat are going to will get punished in the most severe way. They will die. And Moshe couldn't stand to see someone getting punished. It bothered Moshe to his bones, to his core, and he turned to God and he says, kill me first. If you want to punish the Jewish people, I cannot be part of it. So I am not going to, I don't want to, and that's why I want to be killed first. That's the only way, by the way, to explain how come Moshe is speaking in such a harsh way. In other words, just like Aaron, when he sees there is opportunity to do a mitzvah, he wouldn't pass. Moshe, when he sees someone getting hurt, he would not allow it to happen, and he's demanding from God that he should not be part of it. Later on, we see the same story with Miriam. At the end of the portion, at the end of the portion of Be'alotcha, we read about Miriam speaking to Aaron about Moshe. What did she say? So a little bit of a background. Eldad, and after Moshe is complaining to God, God is assigning 70 elders. Two of them, Eldad and Medad, were very humble. They didn't expect God to choose them. They were in the camp, and suddenly they start prophesying. As soon as they start prophesying, Tzipporah, Moshe's wife, turned around and says, woe to their wives if they become prophets, because my husband, as soon as he connected to God, he separated from me and we don't have a relationship. Miriam, upon hearing that, couldn't stand the situation that Tzipporah does not live a life with a husband. And that's the reason she went to Aaron, demanding that, sharing with Aaron what she heard from Tzipporah, demanding that Aaron will be there to rebuke or to speak to Moshe about his behavior. As the Torah tells us, they told each other, God spoke to us as well, and we did not separate from our spouses. We see from here, even though God punished Miriam and there was no place to speak against Moshe, because if God chose him, it means that God knows how perfect he is, as God is warning and punishing them in a harsh way, and Aaron is going to be punished later. But we see from here that the reason Miriam goes to speak to Aaron wasn't plain gossiping, but was the fact that Tzipporah is getting suffered. And the fact that Tzipporah is getting suffered cannot allow Miriam to sit still, and she goes about to try and change. I believe that all three stories, all three leaders in one portion, are all about the same thing. we as Jews, as we'll see it in this week's portion as well, and there are many, many other points that I would like to share as much as time as I have. When we see something, either a positive as Aaron, of an opportunity to participate in a mitzvah, or when we see someone is about to get hurt, or we see that someone is suffering, we stand up and we say, not only you cannot be part of it, but we have to actively get involved, either to participate in a mitzvah, or to avert the decree, or to make sure people don't suffer. And I want to share with you other points that are on the same theme and conclude later on as we see the same story in the portion of the week, in this week's Parsha in Shlach. But before, I want to show that the Rebbe explains, that's why in the Agada, the wicked son is right next to the wise. Even though there are 4 sons in the Agada, and the wicked son is the worst of all 4. He's the one who is marking down. He's the one who refuses to listen. He's the one who don't want to do anything. Yet we put him right next to the Chacham, right next to the wise. And one can ask, he should be number 4. Says the Rebbe that the Rasha, the wicked son, at least is bothered. So he's like an atheist. The whole day he's looking for proofs that there is no God. So at least he's emotionally involved, and there is a chance he's searching, he's learning, he's discovering. Whatever conclusion he reaches, that's another issue. But the fact that he's so involved, there is a very good chance that one day he will get into where he's supposed to. But the tam, the simple, and the one who don't know what to ask, they experience or they express apathy, a behavior that they couldn't care less. They have no idea what's going on. And there is no chance, or there is a very slim chance, they ever will come closer and connect to God. That's why the wicked, the Rasha, is coming right after the Chacham. He's not a Chacham yet, but he's much closer to a Chacham than the other 2. I want to share with you that we see it in Jewish law, and that's where I want to come to. Before we go to this week's portion, when God gave us the Torah, which we celebrated just a couple of weeks ago, we read that Vayan kol ha'am yachdav, the entire people together in unison all said, everything God said, we will accept. Our sages tell us, and the Medrash brings, that kol Israel arevim, all the Jewish people are guarantors for one another. Arev in Hebrew is guarantor. We are guaranteeing for each one of us to connect to God and to perform. So when we see somebody who is not behaving or has a place to improve or learn more, it is our responsibility. And we can't say, let me mind my own business. It doesn't work like that. So actually, when God gave us the Torah, he did not expect us to enter into a covenant just with God, but he made a covenant that we enter with each one of us. The only way, the prerequisite for God to make a covenant with the Jewish people is only after the Jewish people made a covenant with each other. So therefore, once they made a covenant for themselves, so I guarantee you and you guarantee my performance, now God says, I am in a good company, that's when I'll give the Torah. And of course, the Kabbalah goes on to say that it's not just 2 entities, 2 separate human beings who guarantee for each other, but we actually are made of one soul. On the spiritual level, we are one. Being that we one, not only I care for someone else's behavior because I guarantee for his if he messes up, but when he performs, it's like I do, and therefore it's a whole different level. Actually, that is found in the word in Hebrew that the Medrash uses, which is arevim. Kol Israel arevim ze leze. All Jewish people are responsible or guarantors for one another. The word arevim has another meaning, which is mixed up. Me'uravim. Le'arev means to, like eruv. You make an eruv, meaning you mix everybody together to make it one entity. The Jewish people, so on the physical body, we are guaranteeing for each other. And therefore, if I see someone that can improve, can learn more, can do better, it is my responsibility. On the spiritual level, and the neshama, we are me'uravin, we are mixed together, we are one entity. So when someone is lacking or someone is performing properly, it is me performing properly, because we all have the same task, the same mission, which is to bring Mashiach, to reveal God. And when someone performs well, he actually performs my task and does well for me. And that's why me'uravin is from the same word. And then you have a third meaning to the same word, arevim, from the word sweet. Arev in Hebrew is sweet. When we understand that we guarantor for one another and we are mixed together as one soul, realizing that we have the same mission and your mission is the same as mine, then we are living together out of sweetness. And if someone is successful or has great achievements, we are very, very happy, because another person or news of another person makes us very, very happy, makes us feel good. And that explains many Jewish laws. As I said, I want to talk about Jewish law just for a little bit. In Jewish law, if I have an opportunity to save someone's possession, if someone, for example, has a store and they forgot to turn off the AC at after hours, which usually they do, and now they are losing money because the air conditioner is running, and in their store there is no need for air conditioner after hours, it is my duty to find the owners and report to them and let them know. Even if I don't know who the owner is and it involves great efforts, the Torah demands that we look after another person's needs or possession the same as we look after our own, because after all, we are one entity. That's why we have a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, returning a lost object. There is no such law in any other community or a democracy. Any community that comes together, they are about protecting our own rights, the individual rights. As Jews, we are looking for to see what's the right thing to do. And therefore, if someone lost an object, even if it's, let's say, a pet, a dog, a cat, I don't have a dog. I don't have pets in my house. But the fact that someone else lost their dog, it is my obligation to take it, feed it, nurture it, take care of it, and actively search for the owner and return the lost object. It's only out of the idea that we are in our soul, we have the same mission, therefore we become one person. And that's why when we say a blessing, every time we make a blessing, we say in the plural, Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu, our God. We don't say Elokai, and then we continue Asher Kiddushanu, not Asher Kiddushani. Kiddushanu means commended us. B'mitzvotav etzivanu, and commended us, sanctified us and commended us. One should say that he commended me. If I get married, or I have celebrating a bris, a circumcision for my son, or there is any particular mitzvah that I eat food or do grace after meal, it seems that it's my connection with God and it is my obligation to do the mitzvah. Yet when we say the blessing, we include everybody else. And the reason is because we are one neshama. So when you do a mitzvah and when you do a blessing, you sanctify me as well with God. And you bring in the kedusha, the holiness of God, to every single Jew into the universe. And that explains one other peculiarity in the Jewish law, and that is, by Jewish law, we're not allowed to touch someone else's possession. So if I see a bicycle that you parked somewhere, and I have an opportunity to take and use the bike, using the bike, riding on a bike without permission is thievery, is robbery, it's forbidden. And there is consequences for that. But there is an exception. And the exception is for a mitzvah's sake. If I see you shofar, you heard the shofar already, and I want to take the shofar and blow it for my children. They didn't hear the shofar sound. I don't need permission. If I see a lulav and etrog, I see a pair of tefillin, anything that is not going to be, so to say, spent doing the use, and only to be performed a mitzvah, I do not need permission. Code of law, the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, puts in code of law, and it's brought in Shulchan Aruch Bet Yosef, that any object that is made specifically for the performance of a mitzvah, when one needs it, they don't need to ask permission. And the only reason that can explain is because if someone took my shofar and blew it to do a mitzvah, I actually am the beneficiary equally to the one who performed the mitzvah. And therefore, just like I don't ask permission for myself, so does somebody else that when they do perform a mitzvah with my goods. So if I have a pair of tefillin in synagogue and someone walk in, I happen to be a lefty, and he's a lefty and he needs a pair of lefties, they do not need to ask permission. They can just take it and they perform the mitzvah just as if it was their own. However, if it's my bicycle or my car or any other object, if someone used it even for a mitzvah without permission, being that it was not created for the sake of a mitzvah, it is totally forbidden, and there is no benefit from it in the physical world as well as is the spiritual realm. So this is pretty much the idea, because the responsibility, and as we saw in last week's portion, we have an obligation to actively get involved and not say, oh, I'm doing so much. We also have the opportunity, even if God is showing Moshe that they are going to be punished, Moshe says, kill me first, I'm not going to be part of it. And Miriam, it's our brother, yet, and Moshe is our brother, yet we find that she stood up and she refused to accept. We see a very similar idea in this week's portion. And just to make it a little interesting, I want to share with you a story so that we take a little break, but the story is about the same theme of responsibility, that we're, as Jews, not only we have the obligation for ourselves, but in an equal measure, we have an obligation for anybody else.
Rabbi Steinmetz, I just want to cut you off 1 second. We learned in our morning program, Gemara Brachas, where we are learning Gemara Brachas, and one of our interesting insights that we learned was the concept of a person can recite the Berchas Hamazon, the benching, for other people, and according to some opinions, even if they didn't eat, they would be able to bench for someone else because they have a responsibility of benching for another person. And so there are, that idea is not new to a lot of us here, because a lot of us come to the morning program. So there's an element of the person. Not only is he responsible not only are we responsible for each other, but there's a certain element of that person in us that it's almost like we're fulfilling. We have that obligation. It's not just that person is obligated to say grace after meal. I have to say grace after meal because he has to say it. So he's part of me in a certain sense. Anyway, so it's along the lines of what you're saying. Just thought I should add it because we were learning about it in the morning.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. I also studied Gemara Brachas, and I studied it yesterday, Daf Ches. I believe it's in Daf Ches. And the Rambam of the day, those who studied 3 Prakim Rambam, we started yesterday the laws of Brachas. And the first thing he says that Birkas HaMitzvos, as opposed to Birkas HaNenin, anybody can be moitzi others, even if they are not obligated. So thank you very much for bringing it up. It's the same idea, because we are responsible, and as I said, according to the spiritual aspect from the Kabbalah, we are one neshama. So when one performs properly, it is an achievement for the rest of the Jewish people. I want to share with you a story about someone who is totally lost to the Jewish history unfairly and has just been discovered. And the reason I shared with you this is because the point is that God will always reciprocate for good deeds. So even if at first it doesn't seem so, but as we will see in this week's portion, this idea appears in this week's portion. In April 1st, 1933, right after the Nazi party went up to power in Germany, they called in for a day of to ban Jewish businesses, in which young men dressed in brown shirts, SS officers, would stand into the entrances of every Jewish plant or store and try to convince people not to do business with Jewish people. And they have done that so in all over Germany. There was a major department store right across the city hall in Berlin called N Israel. N Israel was owned by a Jewish family by the last name of Israel, was established in 1815, and they had between 2,000 to 2,500 employees, very successful store, very successful department store. There was one lady that the officers tried to stop her, and she turned to them and shouted, my grandparents shopped here, my parents shopped here, and I'll shop here, I'll not stop you. However, they went and started arresting some of the employees and beating them up, except the owner. The owner's name was Wilford Israel. Wilford Israel was not, they didn't bother him simply because he had another citizenship. He was an English citizen, and at the beginning, in the beginning stage of the Nazi ruling, they did not bother Jewish people who had dual citizenship. They didn't want to start up with other governments. Wilford Israel dealt with a lot of cash in that department store. There was a lot of cash flowing. With the cash, he was able to bribe the Nazi officers to release his employees and immediately send them out of the country. He would support them as employees. He would give them a check up between 2 and 3 years after they left Germany, even though they stopped walking by his store. He also immediately saw, by being very well connected with the Nazis, he realized that the ultimate plan is what they actually tried, and he was convincing anyone who he can to leave the country. How would he allow people to leave the country? The English people, the English officials needed some information about the Nazis. And he, being a very close friend with many Nazi officers, he knew a lot of information they needed. And when he would share with them, and he would ask to be paid with certificates allowing people to immigrate to England. Thousands, the estimation that between 1933 to 1939, he saved between 7,000 to 10,000 men. He's the one who started the kinder transport, where he took out from many countries, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Germany, into United Kingdom, thousands of kids. He supported it, he paid for it. In 1939, he traveled to Israel, and he visited a kibbutz. It's a very famous kibbutz in Israel called Kibbutz Azorea. It's right by the foothill of the Carmel Mountain outside of Haifa. The people of that kibbutz were young German men that left in 1933. And he loved the kibbutz, and he said that he wants to one day come back and live the rest of his life there. However, for saving people, he would travel to different countries to, so to say, use his connection to save as many Jews as he can. In 1940, since 1940, people don't know what happened to him. Nobody knows where is he. And the truth is, in 1943, he was asked to fly to Portugal to deliver certificates for Jews in Portugal to immigrate to Israel. And on the way back, his plane was hit by a warplane, German warplane, and his body was never recovered. The entire plane with many passengers fell into the ocean. His name was totally forgot from history, almost 70 years. About 5-6 years ago, a member of the Kibbutz Azorea, he started digging into a house that nobody entered. The house was called the Wilford House, named after Israel Wilford, the owner of that department store. And he discovered not only very, very important and expensive artwork, but a lot of correspondence and a lot of artifacts that belonged to this man. Turned out that when he died, in his will, he put in his will all his artwork, all his art to be donated to Kibbutz HaZorah, to be given. And they actually received his art and they put it in their house that belonged to him, and they shut the door, they closed it up. He had no relatives, there was no relation, nobody knew. Once they discovered, they realized, they started opening his correspondence with Albert Einstein and with all the machers and very famous people in the world. They're all praising for what he has done. 70 years after he's died, a movie, a documentary called, the documentary is called The Essential Life, or in Hebrew, Aisha Ne'elam, the mystery person appeared, and now everybody, in the kibbutz, they open up the house, they renovated it, they put out his artwork, and they all are learning about the life of a man who saved thousands upon thousands of Jewish people. In this week's portion, there is also a very mysterious person that we don't hear about. Somehow we don't hear about, but when we look back, we can discover a lot more. In the portion of Shlach, we read about the 12 spies that was sent by Moshe, and we read upon the return tomorrow, the second section, they coming back, and there are two men who refuse to give a negative report. One of them is Caleb ben Yefuneh. Anybody knows about Caleb, anything about him? And the answer is you won't find much. He's a man of mystery. He appears very few times, only in relations to the spies. Later on in the book of Deuteronomy, Moshe is praising Caleb that he was the only man that stood up. Joshua, Yehoshua wasn't straight rebuking the spies or standing up. We also read that Caleb is the only one that went to Hebron to pray that God will save him from the spies. Yoshua, Moshe already added a U to his name. So Moshe was, so to say, putting a protection. But who is Caleb? Where did he come from? All we know is that Caleb is married to Miriam. Miriam is Caleb's wife. Who is Caleb that he stood up, that had the energy and the ability to stand up to 10 leaders and the majority of the Jewish people? So we don't even know much. However, just like Israel Wilford, we don't know much about their life. All we look is their achievements, but with one small difference, and that is that Caleb had children. Israel Wilford did not. Caleb had a grandson called Betzalel, Hur, ben Hur. Caleb had a son called Hur. Hur is the man that when the Jewish people worship the golden calf, he's trying to prevent them, he's trying to stop them, and they kill him. That's why Aaron did not want to protest the golden calf, because he saw what they did to Hur, and he's afraid that it's his nephew. It's his sister's son, and they're going to do to him the same. So he's going along with the plan. Hur is the grandfather of Betzalel. Betzalel is the one entrusted with the building of the temple. According to the Medrash, the reason Hashem appointed Betzalel to build the temple is because the purpose of the temple, of the Mishkan, is to atone for the golden calf. Because it comes to atone for the golden calf, God says the only one who can build, be involved, or so to say, to reward who got killed for protesting the golden calf, Betzalel, his grandson, will come and build it and, so to say, complete the mission that his father did. So I think that Hur can teach us a little bit about his father. The fact that we don't read about Caleb, about Hur, we do read a little more. First, when Moshe is going up to the Mount Sinai, he's going up the mountain, he turned to the Jewish people and he says, "Veinei Aaron v'Hur imachem." Aaron and Hur are in the camp. If you have any question, if you have any dispute, if you're not sure, go and speak to them. In other words, Hur, even though was a nephew of Aaron, he was equal to Aaron in regards to when Moshe is absent. Hur is going to be there, except that they killed him. But Hur was almost as holy as Aaron. Later on, when Moshe is fighting the Amalekites, so he needed, as God told him, to raise his hand, hold his hands up. He needed people to support his hands. And who is the one who is chosen? On one hand side was Aaron, and the other side is Hur. So sometimes you might think that if someone does for God's sake, for the Jewish people, for other people, for animals, it doesn't matter, for anything good, you don't see the reward. You don't hear about them. They don't get to be treated the way they're supposed to. But if you actually wait a little bit, and sometimes it takes another generation, God will surely reward, as we see by Caleb, even though you don't read about him, you read about his son Hur. And later on, you see that Bezalel is the one who actually, according to Medrash, he knew how to build the menorah. And Moshe called him Bezalel because Moshe says to him, you must be in God's shadow. You know better than me. There are things that Bezalel and Moshe had disputed about what comes first, the furniture or the structure. But Moshe gave in to Bezalel because in certain ways, he was, so to say, if we can say the word advanced, more advanced. And the reason is, the only reason we can explain is because his grandfather, Hur, comes from a father called Caleb, and those good deeds don't go unnoticed. And I think that it comes to the same idea that I showed at the beginning of the class, and that is, when we see an opportunity to get involved, we cannot stand by. As Jewish people, we must get involved. We must get involved to protect. We must get involved. We have an opportunity to do a mitzvah. We have to get involved if we have another Torah class. We need to be part of the community in a positive way. And when there is a negativity, we need to protest and protect. And when that happens, sometimes you ask, for what? What did I gain from it? You ask, who noticed? And nobody gives me credit. Nobody heard of it. But in essence, it takes very short. And if not, it comes back with our children and maybe perhaps to the grandchildren, but it goes back and it's all on the record. And I think that these same points can be said about many, many stories in the Torah portions. One more, I'm just going to say one more. And last week, we see the same theme with the people complaining about Passover. They turn to God, to Moshe, and say, Lama nigara? Why should we lose? And one can ask, what do you mean, why should we lose? You'd lose because you're not pure. Hashem said, you shouldn't do Passover. We don't see people say, I was on a cruise for Sukkot, I want to build a sukkah a week later. I was on a cruise, or I was in the hospital, God forbid, on Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, I couldn't fast, so I want to fast a week later. There's no such thing. For Passover, they came and said, Lama nigora, it bothered them, and because it bothered them, Hashem says, we need to make sure there is another holiday. That's the only biblical holiday that came about because people cared. People stood up and said, we don't want to be treated differently. There was a barrier that did not allow us to celebrate. It doesn't mean we shouldn't get a second chance. And from then and on, we know that we have a second chance. We know that we have many opportunities in a positive, or as I said, when something negative happens, we need to stand up. And I hope that the point is taken. And if anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome.
I just want to mention to you, Rabbi Steinmetz, that we had a very interesting essay from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and it was along the same lines as at least one point is very similar to what you mentioned. I just want to mention his words because he has a beautiful way of expressing this. He says, Judaism is a protest against the world that is in the name of the world that ought to be. And so to be a Yid is to seek to make a difference and to change lives for the better, to heal some of the scars of our fractured world. Anyway, I thought it was along the same lines. But Yasher Kayach, yeah, that's really tremendous, very, very inspirational and important. Great insight. If anyone would like to mention anything or say anything, any thoughts, any questions? Maybe tell us a little, Rabbi Steinmetz, a little about Sarasota and maybe the community. We're always interested in hearing any like shlichus stories.
I moved to Sarasota 32 years ago, and there were very few Jewish families in general, and most of them, there were no...
Change name your phone. iPhone, use iPhone.
Sometimes people just get on. Don't mind that. Sometimes there's
all right.
Mute people.
And today, thank God, Sarasota and Manatee counties have grown. There are 5 Chabad rabbis, shluchim. 2 of them are my sons and another 2 rabbis. And we hope to expand and grow. If I can share a story, there are lots of stories. There is one story I can share because it happens about this time, the first time I moved in. I moved in 1990, at the end of 1990, Rosh Chodesh Kislev Tavshinun Aleph. And we started a synagogue at my home. And I would have a minyan on Friday night and Shabbat. And you know what? There is something else better than that. Not a miracle with me, but a fascinating story. I would get the summary of the Rebbe's Farbrengen after Shabbat. There was a fax, a sicha. There was a fax machine, was just introduced to the universe. We had a fax machine. And every Saturday night or Sunday early morning, we'll get 1 page with a synopsis of the Rebbe's talk. One year, one Shabbos, just before Passover, the Rebbe spoke in 1991 in Tavshin Aleph that miracles are found everywhere, and there is no one to be and there is no exception to the rule. Every Jew can experiences miracles. They just need to pay attention. So the next Shabbat, there were 11 men. And I shared during my sermon what the Rebbe spoke. And I shared that everyone must have experienced a miracle recently. And if they only start thinking about it. And I invited members of the congregation, people who are at my home, to share a miracle that just recently happened to them. And one by one, almost everyone, I believe 8 out of 11, each had a story that was in their eyes was a miracle. I remember just 2 or 3 of them, but one of them is stuck and I repeat it many times. The man that shared the story, his name was Hal Fox. Hal Fox is in the dictionary. He's a tailor from Chicago. He invented the zoot suit. If anybody is familiar with the zoot suit, he was a famous tailor. A lot of Hollywood stars would travel to Chicago, and he's the one who created for the zoot suit. He was an old man. He was in his mid-80s, and he got up to share the following miracle that happened to him. He says that his grandson was celebrating bar mitzvah 2 months back in Queens. So he checked into the hotel for the Shabbos. They were doing the bar mitzvah. They were a Reform family. So they were doing a bar mitzvah at the hotel on Shabbat. In the morning, somebody knocks on the door in his hotel room, and it's his daughter. His daughter says to him, "Grandpa, you need to say the kiddush, the prayer over the challah for the bar mitzvah." And Foxy said to her, "But me, I'm not a rabbi, I don't know the prayer." And she says, "Well, you're the elder, you're the grandpa. Being the grandpa, you should be able to, there is nobody better. You need to say it." And he says to her, but I never learned how to say prayer for the challah. So she says to him, it's not my problem. You have to go and figure it out. Those days, there was no social media. So he decided to walk outside and walk the street. It is Queens, as many Jews. As he's walking out at 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning, there's nobody walking by because people are either in synagogue already or are not yet woken up to go to the 10 o'clock synagogue. And as he's walking by the street, he started crying. Literally, he was very upset. Suddenly, somebody turned to him and says, hey, Papa, what's wrong? He turned around and he sees a African-American huge man standing next to him. And the man turned to him and says, Grandpa, why are you so sad? And Foxy says, I'm sorry, you can't help me. And he says, why? He says, no, it's nothing to do. You won't understand. It has to do with my religion. And the man says to him, tell me what's your problem. Maybe I can give you advice. Maybe I can help you. I see you sad. And he says, no, you won't be able to help me because it's about prayer. And the man says to him, what kind of prayer? And Foxy turned to him and he says, there is a party going on soon in the hotel and they made me the rabbi. They want me to say the prayer over the chali. And I don't know. I'm looking for a rabbi to help me. And this African-American says, I know the blessing. And he shows them, Baruch atah Elokeinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So Foxy, this Jew, is 84, 5, turned to him and says, I'm shocked. How do you know the prayer? And the man says to him, you know, there is a kosher bakery down the street. I walk in the bakery and it's a kosher bakery. So people come and ask me, is this amotzi? Is this mezonot? So I know all the prayers for every type of bread, for every type of cake. I am the perfect person for you. He says, I went back to the hotel and when the party time came, they asked me to say the prayer. And before I says, you won't believe who taught me the prayer. A African-American that never been to a synagogue taught me how to say the following prayer, and that's when he says a prayer. And he says, this is the miracle that I just experienced. So I always love to share this story.
Ashakayach, that was a great story. Okay, any last chance, anyone, if anyone wants to say anything?
I just want to say one thing, Rabbi, I'm going to have to look at your this presentation at least 3 times because there's so much packed into the 1 hour and I want to go over everything you said. I wrote 3 pages of notes and I'm going to have to look at this class many more times. And thank you so much for speaking. Thank you. And
You're
Rabbi,
welcome.
thank you for having this gentleman. Thank you.
And I want to thank Rabbi Steinmetz because it's been a history of the Holocaust in Jewish history. And for all of the years that I have read up upon it, I never heard of Wilford Israel. And just quickly in the Wikipedia, it was very lengthy discussion of who he was. He wasn't particularly religious, but he was a Jew and he helped found Habanim and other activities in Israel. And the same thing is with an Anglo Jew named Nicholas Winton, who also saved hundreds of children again, and he was assimilated, didn't have any particular Jewish identity, but something inside of him as a Jew came out with the understanding is that he had to save fellow Jews as Wilford Israel did. So thank you very much. It was what, as Susan said, it was a wonderful experience listening to you. Thank you, Rabbi Smith, for bringing him to us as well.
You're welcome. I'm honored that I was asked, and I'm very happy that people can benefit from it.
Yasha Kayach, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure. Okay.
Be well,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
You too, Rabbi.
Well, good evening.
Thanks.
Thank
Safe,
you, Rabbi.
everybody.
Good night all.